He called his mother-in-law a charity case, right in front of the board. She didn't flinch. She reached into her clutch and slid a contract across the table. 18% interest, naming rights, signed by you. His face dropped mid-toast. You built your empire with my money, she said, then erased me. Now she's not asking for credit. She's demanding it. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. He introduced everyone, except me. I smiled anyway. Linda's heels sank slightly into the plush carpet as the double doors to the ballroom opened. Laughter, crystal glasses clinking, the low hum of jazz weaving through a sea of blazers and backhanded compliments. She paused just long enough to catch the scent of citrus and cologne, as manufactured as the smiles that turned in sync when Evan raised his hand in welcome. "Welcome, welcome," he called out, guiding a pair of donors toward the center table. His eyes skimmed over the crowd like a lighthouse beam, brisk, bright, and just as quickly gone. Linda stepped in quietly, adjusting her midnight blue shawl. The fabric was heavier than she remembered, or maybe it was just the weight of what tonight promised. She wasn't meant to be here. Evan had insisted the guest list was locked, some fabricated nonsense about headcount and catering. But her daughter Vanessa had pressed quietly but firmly, "Please come, Mom. For me." So here she was, unlisted, uninvited, and unmistakably aware of it. At the coat check, the attendant looked past her to the next guest. Linda gently cleared her throat. "Tickets under Vanessa Hallberg," she said, smiling with a grace only decades of being overlooked could polish. Inside, the room swelled with ambition. Each table centerpiece towered with orchids and white roses. Waiters moved like chess pieces, anticipating need before it appeared. Linda's table, marked Table 7, Family and Founders, was near the back, far enough that the speaker on stage would look like he belonged to someone else's night. She recognized a few faces, board members, Evan's co-workers, the same ones who'd passed around cigars and startup war stories at Christmas. Evan moved from group to group, hand on shoulder, elbow bump, flawless charm. When he finally reached their table, he greeted his parents-in-law, shaking her son's hand firmly. "And of course, we're thrilled to have Vanessa's family here tonight," he said, gesturing broadly to her children and their spouses. "So grateful for their support." He skipped right over Linda. His eyes landed on her for less than a second, less attention than he gave the sous chef's plated tartlets. She smiled anyway. Dinner passed in choreographed beats. Appetizers arrived like small gifts: smoked beet salad, a bisque with chive oil drizzle. Conversation fluttered from stock tips to school districts. Linda nodded politely, making small talk with a woman beside her about rooftop gardens. She didn't say much, but she noticed everything. The way Evan lingered beside the managing director of Coltech, how Vanessa's laughter dimmed the longer Evan talked. The foundation's new name stitched onto napkins, the Evan and Partners Initiative. That had never been the name before. Midway through dessert, a spun sugar nest over dark chocolate mousse, Linda's fork hovered, mid-air, as laughter broke out a few tables down. Evan again, leaning over a group of investors, waving a spoon like a wand. "She's basically a charity case," he joked. "You know how it is, family support and all that. We carry a lot." There was a beat of silence, a few nervous chuckles. Linda's hand didn't tremble. Her fork lowered with the same elegance she'd lifted it. She blinked once, slowly. The air in the ballroom seemed thinner suddenly, like something had been vacuumed out of it. Oxygen, maybe, or trust. She looked across the table. Vanessa was mid-conversation with a woman from the board, unaware. Or pretending. Linda folded her napkin into a perfect square and set it on the table beside her untouched dessert. The chatter blurred around her, but the word, charity, echoed louder with each clink of glass. She reached down for her clutch. Inside, she felt the edge of something thin and rectangular. Not the invitation. There hadn't been one. But a copy of a document she hadn't touched in years. Not yet. She left it where it was. Linda rose gently, muttering something about air. No one stopped her. Evan didn't notice. Or maybe he did, and that was worse. She stepped out onto the quiet of the terrace, city lights shimmering in the glass like stars trapped between lives. She inhaled the cool air, let it settle. Then she whispered, just once, to the night, her voice calm but ironclad, "Charity doesn't charge interest." Behind her, the doors cracked open. A waiter walked out, murmuring into a headset, "She left during dessert. Should we let Mr. Hallberg know?" Linda didn't turn. She smiled, just a little. "He'll notice soon enough. I didn't drop my fork. I dropped the fantasy." It wasn't the joke that broke her. It was the laugh that followed, tight, practiced, like a held breath being let go only because others had let go first. Linda didn't move. Her fork hovered mid-air, the edge of mousse trembling slightly on the prongs. Chocolate, citrus, a hint of sea salt, all of it suddenly flavorless. The words Evan had tossed across the room still floated in the air, heavy and sharp. "She's basically a charity case." Around her, the table chuckled nervously. One man coughed into his napkin. A woman gave that strained laugh women give when they're deciding whether or not to be offended. No one met Linda's eyes. She didn't drop her fork. She dropped the fantasy. The one where silence was dignity, where patience earned respect, where family recognized worth without needing receipts. The fork clinked gently as she placed it back on the plate. She let her eyes drift. A swirl of lavender perfume drifted from the woman beside her. The floral centerpiece between them trembled slightly as a waiter passed too close. Everything was moving, breathing, pretending, except her. Across the room, Evan was still talking. He waved a hand casually, as if words cost nothing. "We carry a lot, supporting her now," he added, eyes flicking toward his table, toward her, for just a second. Linda's spine stayed straight. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, her expression unreadable. But her clutch, it shifted slightly under her grip. The pressure of her palm left a faint imprint in the leather. She glanced toward the head table. Evan's boss, Susan Valenti, sat with a glass of rosé and a front-row view of Evan's little performance. Her smile didn't falter, but Linda noticed the nuance, the slight upward curl that wasn't quite approval, more like calculation. Susan's gaze flicked to Linda, a second of eye contact, measured, curious. Then Susan nodded, almost imperceptibly, before returning her attention to the stage. Linda's fingers relaxed slightly. That nod, that fraction of acknowledgement, told her more than any applause ever could. At her own table, the conversation had resumed, artificially light. Someone was talking about a weekend in Aspen. Vanessa leaned in, laughing too brightly, the veins in her neck taut with quiet tension. She hadn't heard, or didn't want to believe she had. Linda touched her daughter's arm lightly. "I think I'll step outside for a moment," she said. Vanessa looked at her then, really looked. "You okay?" "Of course," Linda said softly. "It's a lovely event." And it was. Tasteful, expensive, perfectly orchestrated. That was the thing about masks. They didn't just cover, they coordinated. She stood. This time people noticed. Chairs shifted subtly. A few eyes flicked toward her, then away. She made her way past the dessert table, past the young woman arranging name tags near the silent auction items, past Evan, who didn't stop talking long enough to notice her passing behind him. But Susan Valenti noticed. As Linda passed, Susan turned slightly. "Ms. Hallberg," she said, just loud enough. Linda paused. "Yes?" "I hope you're enjoying the evening," Susan said. Her tone was smooth, neutral, but her eyes were glinting, intelligent, unreadable, interested. "I'm observing it," Linda said with a smile that had teeth. Susan raised her glass in silent acknowledgement. Linda continued on, stepping through the glass doors to the same terrace as before. The night air had cooled. The jazz inside was muffled now, a faraway hum like something underwater. She leaned against the railing, watching taillights pass beyond the hedge-lined lot. From behind her, voices drifted through the cracked door. Evan again, laughing louder now, emboldened by nods and validation. "She's lucky we keep her in the loop. Honestly, it's like running a second household." Linda's hand tightened again around the clutch at her side. Inside it, the edges of paper pressed against the leather. She opened the flap just a little, enough to slide 2 fingers in and feel the cool edge of a document that had gone untouched for far too long. And for the first time that evening, her smile wasn't polite. It was strategic. He calls it support. I call it interest on what I built. The whir of the printer was the only sound in the house, low, mechanical, deliberate, like something waking up, like memory turning itself into evidence. Linda stood still, watching the page feed out, black ink on ivory paper, her signature bold and smooth in the bottom corner. It looked untouched by time. The contract hadn't aged, but she had. Her hand hovered above it for a beat before she picked it up. That night, after the dinner, she hadn't slept. Not out of anger. Anger was too noisy. What she felt was quieter. A chill recognition, like standing on a floor you once laid yourself and realizing someone else has claimed the blueprints. Evan's voice echoed in her head. We carry a lot supporting her now. As if he'd forgotten, or maybe he'd always hoped she had. Linda sat at the kitchen table, oak, polished, solid. She reached for her laptop, flipped it open, and typed 3 words into the search bar. Hallberg sponsorship agreement. It popped up in less than 3 seconds. Not buried, not hidden, just waiting. The file opened with a soft click, like the door to a room she'd closed and left untouched. Her eyes scanned the text, line by line, her name at the top, Evans underneath. She remembered the day it was signed. Vanessa had been out of town, something about a marketing retreat in Sedona. Evan had shown up at her door, back then still flushed with hope and caffeine, talking too fast, promising too much. It's a software idea, HR automation, nothing too flashy, but scalable. He'd said the word scalable like it was a magic spell. She hadn't pretended to understand every line of the pitch, but she'd understood the risk. I can't go to a bank yet. If this doesn't work, she'd raised her hand mid-sentence. You'll sign something. We'll make it formal. He'd blinked, surprised. You don't trust me? I trust the version of you that keeps promises in writing. They'd gone to her friend Nadira's notary office. Linda had worn pearls. Evan had forgotten his pen. She remembered handing him hers, silver, engraved, the kind you refill instead of throw away. He never gave it back. Now she scrolled down the document, heartbeat steady. Principal, $30,000. Terms, 18% annual return, compounded quarterly naming rights clause. In the event of successful launch, any philanthropic entity established within the brand portfolio must carry the name Hallberg or forfeit 30% of equity value for breach. She exhaled slowly. Support, he'd called it. As if she'd handed him a casserole, she printed 1 copy, then another. The smell of warm paper filled the kitchen, soft and faintly chemical. Outside, early morning light touched the windows. The silence of the neighborhood stretched, a comforting absence of performance. No applause, no cameras, just a woman with proof in her hand and time on her side. She slid the documents into a red envelope, the kind used for holiday cards or wedding money. Deliberate, loud, unmissable. Then a knock on the back door. She turned sharply, startled. It was Vanessa, still in heels from the night before, makeup faded just slightly. Her eyes were wide, tired. "Mom," she said quietly. "Can I come in?" Linda stepped aside, wordless. Vanessa's hands were shaking slightly as she set her purse down. "He didn't mean it that way. You know how Evan gets when he's trying to impress people." Linda sat back down, smoothing the edge of one of the printed pages with her thumb. "No, darling, I know how Evan gets when he's lying." Vanessa's eyes welled, but she didn't argue. "I found it," Linda said softly. She pushed the first copy across the table. Vanessa looked down. Her breath hitched. "You kept this? Did you think I wouldn't?" Vanessa sat slowly, fingers tracing the signature line. This changes everything." Linda smiled, cool and unwavering. "Number it just reminds us what was true all along." She picked up the second copy and slid it into her tote bag, next to the red envelope. Then she whispered to herself, firm, final, and not for anyone else to hear. "One for me, one for them." He thought I forgot the terms. I remembered the rate. Linda stared at the contract like it had just spoken. 18%. It pulsed in her mind like a second heartbeat, steady, precise, legal. It wasn't a memory, it wasn't nostalgia, it was a rate, a number, a promise measured in time and zeros, a quiet declaration made by ink and witnessed by law. The paper sat on her kitchen table, smooth and exact. She traced the clause with one finger. Annual return, 18% compounded quarterly, co-naming rights on any entity derived from initial capital investment. He had signed it, not once but twice, first on the standard line and again beside the initials box next to the naming clause. She remembered insisting on that second signature, a small insurance against amnesia. Linda rose from her chair and poured herself a cup of coffee. No sugar this time. The bitterness grounded her. The kitchen smelled faintly of last night's lavender candle and the now cooled scent of toast. The morning sun cast sharp lines across the floor like the beams of a spotlight, but this wasn't a stage. Not yet. She took the red envelope, pressed it closed, and slid it into her tote. Her hands were steady now. A soft ding pulled her attention to her phone, a message from Vanessa. "Will you come to the gala this weekend? It's the Foundation's 5-year. Evan's giving a speech." Linda didn't respond right away. She scrolled down and saw the attached invite, a digital flyer with soft gold trim and navy serif font. Evan and Partners Foundation 5-year celebration gala, a night of vision, legacy, and innovation. She stared at the banner. The name glared at her, louder than any insult he'd ever whispered. No Hallberg, no mention, not even a ghost of it. Her jaw clenched. She tapped the flyer image, expanding it. At the bottom, in faint print, was a short paragraph about the fund's origin. Launched in 2018 with support from private investors, built on a mission of entrepreneurial mentorship and corporate accountability. Private investors, as if she were one of many, as if her money had been just another wire transfer from some faceless entity in a portfolio. Linda blinked slowly. She had given him his start, not as a gesture, not out of pity, but with purpose and terms. He had not simply taken her support. He had monetized her silence. She opened the drawer beside her, where she kept the things she didn't need often, but never forgot. Inside, wrapped in a soft cloth, was the fountain pen Evan never returned, still gleaming, still hers. She placed it beside the contract on the table, then reached into her tote and pulled out a yellow legal pad. At the top, in bold letters, she wrote, "Calculation, principal plus interest." She did the math slowly, carefully. $30,000, compounded quarterly at 18% for 5 years. Her eyes widened slightly, not at the amount, but at the fact that Evan had assumed it would vanish, unclaimed, unremembered, unenforced. She circled the total and tapped her pen against the edge of the paper like a gavel. In the afternoon, she dressed with care, not for vanity, but for message. A tailored navy jacket, gold earrings, subtle but unmistakable. The pen slid into her clutch. The 2 copies of the agreement followed. The gala was held at the Glasswell Conservatory, newly renovated, lined with backlit glass panels and high ceilings that made every voice echo with importance. She walked in just as Evan stepped onto the stage. "Tonight," he said into the mic, smiling to a room that had already decided he was a visionary, "we honor legacy." Linda stepped further into the space, unnoticed at first, her eyes scanning until they landed on the massive banner stretched across the main wall. Evan and Partners Foundation Building. Tomorrow's, today. She stood still. No Hallberg, not even small print, not even a footnote. She turned to the usher. "Excuse me," she said, voice calm. "Could you tell me where the donor recognition wall is?" He smiled politely. "Right this way." She followed, fingers brushing the edges of her clutch. Her pace was measured. Her heart was not. He showed his boss the plaque. I showed her the signature. The cafe smelled like burnt espresso and buttered croissants. Linda liked this place. Quiet, sun-drenched, with terracotta tiles that clicked gently beneath her low heels as she stepped inside. She hadn't come here by accident. She spotted Susan Valenti near the window, half hidden behind a laptop and a mimosa. Sharp blazer, no jewelry, posture straight as ever. The kind of woman who answered her own questions before anyone had the chance to lie. Linda walked to the counter first, ordered a single-shot latte, no foam. The barista gave her a practiced smile. She returned it. Everything about her this morning was precise. A soft chime rang overhead as another guest walked in, but Linda didn't turn. Her attention was locked on Susan now, who looked up just as Linda stepped to her table. "Ms. Halberg," Susan said, removing one AirPod, "didn't expect to see you here?" "Neither did Evan," Linda replied, placing her latte down and sliding into the opposite chair without waiting for an invitation. Susan tilted her head, a slow, curious smile forming. "I take it last night was instructive. You could say that." They sat in brief silence. The hum of espresso machines filled the air. 2 tables over, someone was laughing too loudly about cryptocurrency. Linda took a sip of her drink. Bitter? Perfect. Susan leaned back. "Evan tells a good story, doesn't he? College dropout, built a company from nothing, turned it into a philanthropic engine." "From nothing," Linda repeated softly. "That's the part that always catches my ear." Susan didn't answer. She just watched, the way a hawk watches a branch about to snap. Linda reached into her tote and pulled out the red envelope. She placed it on the table like it was something sacred. Or dangerous. "I thought you'd like to see the original version of that story," she said. Susan hesitated, just slightly. Then she lifted the flap and slid out the document. 1 page, 2 signatures, a figure written clearly. $30,000. Terms bolded, sealed, and notarized. Her eyes scanned quickly but carefully. Linda didn't interrupt. When she finished, Susan placed the papers down, adjusting them neatly. She tapped a finger just once on the signature line. "So, you funded the seed round?" Linda nodded. "I also negotiated naming rights on any philanthropic arm that grew from the company. I suppose Evan forgot that part. Or hoped you had. He always did mistake silence for forgetfulness." Susan chuckled, but her eyes didn't. "This document changes a lot." Linda leaned forward slightly. "Not really. It just makes the truth louder." Outside, someone honked. A dog barked. Life continued in the background, mundane and unaware. But inside the cafe, something shifted, an invisible ledger rebalancing itself. Susan tapped the edge of the table. "You didn't go public with this last night. Why?" "Because crowds are easy to impress. But power," Linda said, "likes to read." Another moment of silence stretched between them. Finally, Susan folded the document and slid it back into the envelope, then placed it in her own bag. "Would you mind if I keep this for review?" Linda smiled. "That's why I brought it." Susan took another sip of her mimosa. "Evan's going to be furious." "He'll be surprised," Linda corrected. "He gave me the pen I signed that with. Never asked for it back." Susan laughed, a real one this time. "That sounds like him." Linda stood and gathered her things. "Enjoy the rest of your brunch." "Linda?" Susan called after her. She turned. "Just curious," Susan said, brow lifted. "What would you like me to do with this?" Linda's answer came calmly, with the weight of certainty behind it. "Start by remembering who was there first." She left the cafe without another word, her heels echoing lightly across the tiles. Back at her car, her phone buzzed. A new message. Unknown number. "We should talk. SV." Linda looked at it for a moment, then smiled. The initials told her everything she needed. They lined up the donors. "I stood behind the camera." The flash snapped twice, casting a cold white light across the manicured line of faces. Laughter followed. Polite, performative, and someone clapped once, sharp and offbeat, like applause that forgot why it started. Linda stood just outside the frame. Not because she was shy, not because she didn't belong, but because no one asked her to step forward. A young assistant with a clipboard had walked past her 3 times already, double-checking names. "Mr. and Mrs. Lee, yes, your front row. And Dr. Franklin, wonderful to have you. You're listed as platinum tier." Platinum tier. She let that phrase settle in her mind like ash on velvet. Not a title, just a price bracket. The others gathered under the large banner with its deep navy and gold trim. Evan and Partners Foundation, 5 years of impact. The backdrop shimmered slightly under the camera lights. Photographers called out names. Closer together. Hold the plaque higher. Big smiles. Linda adjusted the strap on her shoulder bag. She didn't need to hold the plaque. She already owned the signature beneath it. She wandered to the reception desk, fingers skimming the edge of the glossy program booklet stacked neatly in a brass tray. She picked one up and opened it slowly, letting her eyes scan the credits. Founders, benefactors, donor circle, executive council, visionaries, names in bold, full-page tributes. Even Evan's high school chemistry teacher had a paragraph under formative mentors, but not her, not even a footnote. Her name wasn't missing. It had been scrubbed. She flipped to the back, acknowledgments, gratitude paragraphs full of phrases like early believers and grassroots support. She closed it before she reached the sentence she knew wouldn't be there. Behind her, the photographer called, "We're almost done with the donor group. Any final additions?" Linda didn't move. Instead, she walked to the edge of the group, watching from behind a ficus plant as the donors smiled under artificial lights. Evan stood in the center, hands folded confidently in front of him. Vanessa was beside him, smile tight, eyes scanning the crowd. Not for her mother, it seemed. Just as the final photo was taken, Linda raised her phone and snapped one of her own. A still frame of the moment, her absence framed in the symmetry of inclusion. Someone tapped her shoulder. It was a volunteer, barely out of college, polite and overwhelmed. "Ma'am, I have you listed for the second row, general seating just to the left of the refreshment tables." "Second row?" Linda repeated. The girl hesitated. "Sorry, they said the front is reserved for board members and top-tier sponsors. You're not on the primary donor sheet?" Linda smiled gently. "No, I suppose I'm not." She walked past the refreshments, untouched trays of mini quiches and glistening grapes, and made her way to a table near the edge of the ballroom. From her tote, she pulled out her reading glasses and her phone. The room buzzed around her. Chatter, clinking glass, the soft swell of string quartet music from the corner. She opened her email app. Typed quickly. No flourish, no anger, just precision. 2. Donors at evanpartnersfoundation.org. Subject, correction. Dear Donor Relations, I believe there's an omission in your print materials. Please advise on the process for rectifying historical attribution errors concerning founding investments and naming rights. Best, Linda Hallberg. She read it once, then hit send. A beat later, she added the photo she took to a private folder labeled Restitution. Across the room, Evan caught her eye, just for a moment. His smile faltered, and in that exact second, Linda knew. He saw the storm coming. And this time, she was behind the lens. "My daughter asked me not to make waves. I asked her if I looked like water." The teacup clinked louder than it should have when Linda set it down. Across the table, Vanessa flinched slightly but covered it with a sip of her own untouched chamomile. The Sunday light pooled in from the bay windows of Linda's kitchen, casting long shadows over the oak table where 1,000 family conversations had unfolded, first report cards, then college applications, then wedding guest lists. But this one was different. Linda didn't speak first. She stirred her tea, slow and even. The silver spoon made soft circles, like clock hands circling an hour that no longer ticked on anyone else's watch. Vanessa cleared her throat. "Mom, I know things have been tense, and I know last night wasn't ideal." Linda looked up. Her expression didn't shift, but her eyes were sharp, clear enough to make Vanessa's words feel flimsy. "I just think maybe it's not worth escalating," Vanessa continued. "It's family. That should mean something." Linda tilted her head slightly. "To who?" "Mom, please don't do this." "I'm not the one who started this," Linda said calmly. "But go ahead. Say what you came to say." Vanessa's fingers curled around the teacup. She didn't drink. "Look, I get it. You feel overlooked. Evan should have included your name. I've already told him that." "Did you?" Linda asked, voice quiet but anchored. Or did you tell him to manage it? Vanessa's face colored. I told him it wasn't fair. I told him your feelings mattered. Linda's silence was louder than any accusation. Mom, please, Vanessa said. The gala's over. The board's happy. It's just, we're trying to build something visible, sustainable. You know how optics work. Evan's story, Linda cut in, was built on my check and my silence. Vanessa's breath caught. That was years ago. Linda stood slowly, walked to the sideboard, and returned with a slim manila folder. She set it down between them, her hand resting on it for a moment before sliding it forward. Open it. Vanessa hesitated, then peeled back the flap. Inside, the crisp contract stared back at her. Every line intact, every term legally enforceable. Her fingers froze at the bottom where the signatures rested, ink slightly faded but still bold. You still kept this? She whispered. Linda nodded once. Of course I did. The kitchen was suddenly very still. Outside, a dog barked distantly. A lawnmower started up somewhere down the street. Familiar, domestic noise, like the world trying to reassure them that everything was normal. But inside, the air had changed. Vanessa set the contract down gently, as if it might burn. You actually printed 2 copies? Linda reached into her tote on the floor, pulled out the second. I gave the first one to Susan Valenti. Vanessa's eyes snapped up. You what? Linda didn't raise her voice. Your husband's boss now knows exactly where the seed funding came from and what he promised in exchange. You're nuking his career. I'm reclaiming what's mine. Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed. Her nails tapped the side of her cup, short rhythmic bursts like a code she couldn't quite crack. You're choosing pride over peace. No, Linda said softly. I'm choosing truth over pretending. There's a difference. Tears formed, but didn't fall. Vanessa looked away, then back again. You always taught me to be gracious. And you are, Linda said. But grace without boundaries becomes erasure. Vanessa finally looked down again at the contract. Her fingers brushed the edge. You're really going through with this? I already have. Vanessa stared at the page in front of her for a long time, then exhaled. Not a sigh. Something heavier. You still kept this? She repeated. This time, it wasn't judgment. It was awe. And maybe, just maybe, fear. He told the board it was his vision. I gave him the light. The email Linda sent was only 2 lines. Subject, coffee soon? Message, I'd love that, but I also have something you'll want to see. She hit send and sat back, letting the cursor blink in her inbox like a metronome keeping time with her resolve. The reply came in under 5 minutes. Name the place, and bring whatever that something is. Dana Caldwell had always been the kind of woman who didn't need to pretend to be powerful. She was powerful, in finance, in philanthropy, and in her ability to sniff out a lie before it finished breathing. Linda hadn't spoken to her in over a year, but when they embraced outside a downtown cafe 2 days later, it was as if no time had passed. You always look like you're walking away from a fire, Dana said, eyeing her with a smirk. What is it this time? A house thinks it built itself, Linda said, sliding the manila folder across the table. Dana opened it, didn't blink, just started reading. The coffee steamed between them. A cyclist flew by in the street. Across the way, someone sprayed down the sidewalk, water hitting pavement in rhythmic splashes. But here, it was still. Quiet in the way that happens when the truth is opening its mouth. When Dana reached the bottom of the contract, her eyebrows lifted. He signed off on this? Willingly, Linda said. Dana chuckled, low and sharp. And now he's trying to parade around like the godfather of generosity. Linda sipped her Americano. I gave him his first $1, and I gave him the framework for the foundation? The name? That was his third choice after mine. Dana leaned back. He's gone full legacy architect. You know he pitched the board last month for a multi-year expansion? Linda nodded once. Built on my capital, pitched with no mention of it. Dana stared at her a moment, then opened her phone and typed something quickly. I have a suggestion, she said. There's an upcoming rotation for the foundation's review panel, 3 open seats. They're pulling in legacy contributors to enhance transparency. You want in? Linda didn't even hesitate. Yes. Dana smiled. Good. I'll make the call. 3 days later, Linda received the formal invitation in the mail. White cardstock, embossed letterhead, polite language draped in institutional courtesy. We invite you to serve as a temporary advisory member of the Evan and Partners Foundation's Grant Oversight and Funding Review Panel for the upcoming quarter. She placed the letter next to her red envelope and stared at them both. One was invitation, one was origin, and now they were partners. The panel met in a sleek glass conference room inside the Foundation's downtown office. Linda walked in wearing slate gray and pearls. She didn't announce herself. She didn't need to. Evan wasn't there. But 2 of his board members were, and they shook her hand like they already knew who she was, just not the full story. She sat through the agenda, listened, took notes, and when the floor opened for historical funding disclosures, she raised her hand. I have a question about attribution, she said, specifically concerning donor origin for the Foundation's seed year. The room went still. One of the board members glanced at the other. That would fall under archival reconciliation, he said slowly. Then consider this a request, Linda said, sliding a copy of the contract across the table. I believe the documentation has yet to be reconciled. No one argued. That night, Evan opened his inbox to an email from the Board Compliance Committee. Subject: Action required message. Please prepare to verify historical funding sources for the Foundation's initial capital formation. Documentation due by end of week. He stared at it for a long time, jaw tight, then whispered, She didn't. But deep down, he knew. She absolutely did. Last time I sat quiet. This time I brought documentation. The sound of glassware clinking echoed through the private dining room like wind chimes before a storm. Linda stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping in, her heels soft against the dark hardwood, the low hum of laughter brushing past her shoulders like a memory. Round tables dressed in navy linens, candles flickering in crystal cylinders, and a low jazz trio playing in the corner gave the evening an air of sophistication. It was almost identical to the last dinner. Almost. Except this time she wasn't alone. Reservation is under Hallberg, Linda told the host, a quiet emphasis on the name. Her guest stepped forward beside her, tall, composed, with a leather portfolio in hand. Charles Liddell, CPA, 3 decades of quiet audits, corporate whispering, and surgical math. He was more introvert than firepower, but tonight he didn't need to be loud. He just needed to be here. Evan spotted them as they approached the table and stood up with performative warmth. Linda, I didn't know you were bringing a +1. You didn't ask, she replied simply. Charles is my accountant. There was a slight stutter in Evan's smile, like a flickering bulb. He extended a hand. Charles shook it, nodding once, silent and unreadable. Vanessa looked from Linda to Charles and then back again, her lips parting to speak, but choosing not to. They took their seats. Linda adjusted her napkin, eyes skimming the table, board members, donors, Evan's VP of Strategy, and Susan Valenti seated 2 spots away, watching everything like a judge behind tinted glasses. Appetizers arrived, toasted fig crostini, herbed goat cheese. Linda barely touched hers. She waited, let the conversation swell, let Evan grow confident in his rhythm, the smooth anecdotes, the well-placed quips, the forward-facing optimism. He lifted his wine glass during the second course, grilled sea bass with citrus beurre blanc, and raised it toward the room. To grow, he said, and to the people who believed before anyone else did. Linda raised her glass with the rest. Cheers, someone called. To vision. To Evan, said another. Linda sipped, then set her glass down, and slid a red envelope across the white linen table toward him. Evan blinked, his hand still hovering over his drink. What's this? Charles, quiet all night, finally spoke. Fiscal reconciliation request, Q1 through Q3, sponsorship returns, including interest accrual projections. The air contracted. Evan didn't move. Linda rested her elbows lightly on the table, fingers clasped. It's a formal request for distribution based on the original sponsorship agreement, she said, voice cool and measured. You'll find the payment schedule and documentation enclosed. A hush rippled across the table. Someone coughed. The jazz trio's bass line suddenly felt distant and ridiculous. Susan set down her fork. Evan stared at the envelope as though it might bite. "You're doing this here?" he muttered, voice low. "You made your pitch in a room like this," Linda said. It felt appropriate to respond in kind. "This is not the time." "It's past time." Vanessa reached under the table, touched Evan's leg. He pulled his napkin into his lap with a sudden intensity, as if trying to regain control of something. Charles took out a second copy from his portfolio and passed it down to Susan without a word. She flipped it open without flinching. "Evan," Susan said quietly, "is this what I think it is?" Evan didn't answer. His face had paled. Linda sat back in her chair, eyes never leaving his. "Last time, I was a ghost in this room. This time, I brought records." He opened the envelope with stiff hands, scanned the front page, stopped. Linda saw the exact moment he reached the clause about interest. 18%, quarterly, retroactive. His hand froze, mid-toast, mid-breath, mid-performance. And the glass he held trembled, just enough to spill a single drop of wine onto his white shirt, just enough to mark him. He said I blindsided him. I said I was always in plain sight. The door didn't slam, but it wanted to. Evan's shoes thudded hard against the kitchen tiles, his pace tight with rage barely disguised as control. The house was too quiet, too still, the kind of silence that followed public embarrassment like a shadow. Linda stood at the stove, calmly pouring water from the kettle into her favorite porcelain teacup. No flinch, no glance. Just the sound of steam rising and the sharp tap of ceramic against ceramic. He didn't speak at first, just hovered, backlit by the doorway like a storm stalling on the horizon. Then, "What the hell was that?" Linda stirred honey into the tea, slow and deliberate. "Chamomile?" she asked, holding the cup up without turning. "Might help you sleep." "I'm not here for tea," he snapped. She set the cup down gently. "No. You're here because your suit is stained and your narrative's cracked." He stepped closer, jaw clenched. "You blindsided me, in front of donors, in front of Susan." Linda finally turned. Her eyes were level, her posture unshaken. "I was always in plain sight, Evan. You just chose not to see me. You could have come to me privately." "I did," she said, "years ago. I came to you when you needed a future and a favor. I gave you both." Evan's hand ran through his hair, tousling it into something boyish and undone. "You don't understand what kind of pressure I'm under, the expectations, the optics." "Oh, I understand optics," she said, her voice dropping slightly. "They're what you use to erase people without touching them." His fists rested on the counter now, knuckles pale. "You've put everything at risk. The foundation, my credibility, our family." "Our family?" she repeated, a sharp edge entering her tone. "You stood under a banner that erased my name and called it legacy. You served speeches on tables I paid for and made me sit in the second row. And when I finally asked to be acknowledged, you treated it like sabotage." Evan's voice dropped low, warning. "You're risking everything." Linda stepped forward, eyes locked onto his. "You risked everything the day you gambled that I would stay silent." Outside, the wind stirred through the garden. The lemon tree branches tapped gently against the window pane. Somewhere down the hall, a grandfather clock ticked past another minute neither of them would get back. Evan exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You're not the only one who gave up something for this." Linda reached for her tea. "And yet I'm the only one who was expected to forget." He looked at her then, not with anger, but something closer to realization. Like he'd just seen her clearly for the first time and didn't quite recognize the woman staring back. She walked past him slowly, deliberately, and placed her cup in the sink. "You want to protect your story, Evan? That's fine, but don't rewrite mine to do it." He didn't respond. Just stood there, shoulders drawn tight, caught in the space between pride and panic. Linda turned at the doorway. "One more thing," she said. He looked up. "I still haven't cashed the interest." Then she disappeared down the hall, leaving him in a kitchen full of silence, his reflection flickering in the dark window above the sink. He brought ambition, I brought memory. The boardroom was colder than it looked. Sleek, modern. Glass walls, white oak table, filtered light from floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything in the Evan and Partners Foundation building was designed to look transparent, but Linda knew better. Opacity wasn't about glass. It was about omission. She sat at the far end of the table, shoulders squared, hands folded neatly over a notepad. No papers today, no red envelopes, just her presence and memory. "Next item," said a woman at the head of the table, Marjorie Bell, chair of the Recognition Committee. "Legacy donor nominations. We've had several names put forward for this quarter's slate, including one silent backer from the foundation's founding year." The word silent lingered in the air. Linda didn't blink. Marjorie flipped through her folder. Nominee Linda Hallberg. Every head turned toward her. Some polite, some confused, a few surprised. Evan was seated halfway down the table. He didn't turn. He stared straight ahead like the sound hadn't registered or like he was holding himself hostage inside his own body. Susan Valenti cleared her throat. "Ms. Hallberg has been involved with the foundation since before it existed," she said. Her tone was even, but her eyes were sharp. "I believe this nomination is long overdue." Linda didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her name was doing the talking now. Marjorie continued, "Proposal is to reclassify Ms. Hallberg's contribution status from private lender to founding legacy donor, with public acknowledgement in materials moving forward, including the 5-year report, the annual gala program, and all online donor listings." Someone asked, "Will this affect any equity claims?" "No," said Susan. "The financial reconciliation has already been handled privately. This is about record accuracy and recognition." There was a pause, a beat too long. Then someone murmured, "She funded the seed year?" Marjorie nodded. "Original signed agreement, 18% interest clause, co-naming rights clause, verified." Another pause, then a vote. "Those in favor?" Hands went up, 8 of them, a few tentative, a few firm. "Opposed?" 1. Evan. His hand lifted, slow and bitter, like he was weighing it against gravity itself. Marjorie didn't flinch. "Motion passes." Linda exhaled through her nose, calm and quiet. She didn't smile. She just remembered. She remembered Evan on her front porch that night, hands shaking as he held the proposal. She remembered the fountain pen. She remembered signing before he did. He brought ambition, but she had brought memory, and now the room carried it too. The meeting ended shortly after. A few board members stopped to offer handshakes and soft apologies in their eyes, the kind that come too late to matter. Susan walked over with a tablet in her hand, screen glowing. "They're drafting the press release now," she said, tapping to enlarge the header. Linda looked down. Evan and Partners Foundation welcomes legacy benefactor Linda Hallberg, recognized as founding investor and philanthropic partner. Her name was in bold, clean, undeniable. Evan passed behind them without a word, his gait stiff, his silence louder than any outburst could have been. For a man who built a brand on stories, his own had just been edited in real time. Linda handed the tablet back. "Thank you for honoring it." Susan's response was simple. "Thank you for writing it." Outside, the sky had turned a steel gray, clouds bruised with coming rain. Linda wrapped her shawl tighter and stepped into the wind, letting it catch her breath for a moment. The building behind her shimmered in the reflection of a shallow puddle, glass, steel, and now, truth. In her inbox that evening, a draft of the official press release waited for her approval. She scrolled to the byline and paused. Below her name, in small italic font, formerly listed as anonymous donor. Linda clicked once. Edit, listed as founding force. She hit send. He quoted legacy. I quoted page 2. The silence in Evan's office wasn't peaceful. It was expectant, like a wire pulled too tight, ready to snap. Linda sat across from him, legs crossed neatly, a leather folder in her lap. The same pen she'd used to sign the original contract rested between her fingers. Her nails tapped against it, steady, rhythmic, a sound more precise than any gavel. Evan didn't offer her coffee this time. Instead, he stood behind his desk like it was armor, his arms folded, eyes darting between her and the folder. "You already won," he said. "The board gave you the title, the recognition. The press release went out. What more do you want?" Linda opened the folder. Page 1, the agreement. Page 2, the clause. She slid the paper across the desk and tapped the middle of the second sheet. "You forgot this," she said quietly. Evan squinted down. His expression shifted slowly, from dismissal to confusion to sudden, bone-deep dread. Clause 4.2, Naming Rights Enforcement. In the event of public breach of naming rights clause, the sponsor shall be entitled to terminate equity participation and claim buyout equivalent to projected earnings, plus damages related to breach of agreed public attribution. Evan's voice was barely above a whisper. "You're invoking this? You broke the clause, Evan. When you took my name off the foundation's materials, when you presented it as yours alone, you voided your own terms." He sank into his chair, staring at the page like it might rearrange itself if he looked hard enough. "You're not seriously going after damages," he said. Linda tilted her head. "I told you from the beginning. I wasn't giving you a gift. I was making an investment." He looked up, something breaking behind his eyes. "This could ruin me." She didn't flinch. "You've spent 5 years building a narrative. I spent 30 before that building the money you borrowed to create it. You'll destroy everything we've built, everything Vanessa is a part of." Linda stood slowly. "You destroyed the contract the moment you erased the signature." She turned toward the door. He stood too, fast. "You don't have to do this. You've made your point. You're in the spotlight now." Linda paused with her hand on the doorknob. "Evan, this was never about the spotlight. This was about the fine print you thought no one would read." The hallway outside was quiet, cool, clean. A glass trophy case lined one wall with photos from gala nights, smiling guests, glossy plaques. She didn't stop to look. Back home, Linda placed the folder beside a thick white envelope already stamped and sealed. Inside it, a formal letter drafted by her lawyer, complete with clause citations, timeline of breach, interest calculations, and a final line that read like a guillotine drop. Total claim, $312,000. Deadline to respond, 14 business days. She picked it up and ran her fingers across the seal, not with hesitation, with reverence. Then she slipped on her coat and stepped into the afternoon sun, the late-day warmth folding around her like a quiet crown. Her attorney, Marcia Klein, met her outside the postal office, papers in hand. "You're sure?" Marcia asked. Linda looked her straight in the eye. "Page 2. Marcia smiled, crisp and approving. "Let's mail him the rest of the story." As the clerk stamped the envelope and dropped it into the outgoing bin, Linda turned and walked away, heels clicking with finality. Behind her, a notification pinged on Evan's phone. Subject, Legal Notice, Hallberg Visha Hallberg Foundation, Holdings, Inc. And somewhere between page 1 and page 2, the empire he built started to crack. He said I was lucky to be supported. His boss said otherwise. The call came at 6:42 a.m., unusual but not unwelcome. Linda was halfway through her morning routine, her robe tied neatly at the waist, tea steeping beside her on the counter, when the screen lit up. S. Valenti, Mobile. She let it ring once more before answering, steady and unhurried. "Susan." "Linda," Susan said, "I hope I'm not calling too early." "Not at all," Linda replied, setting down her spoon. "Early calls are usually the ones that matter." There was a pause, measured, deliberate. Then Susan's tone shifted from polite to purposeful. "I wanted to speak with you before it becomes official," she said. "We're restructuring the keynote panel for the Women in Wealth seminar next quarter, and the board unanimously agreed. We'd like you to headline." Linda blinked once, but her voice remained composed. "You're inviting me to speak?" "Not just speak," Susan clarified. "Keynote. Close the day. The theme is legacy, leverage, and the long game. We'd like your story to anchor it." Linda's fingers curled gently around her teacup. "And what story would that be, exactly?" Susan let out a quiet, knowing breath, the one about the woman who funded Vision and got forgotten, until she wrote her name back into the frame. Outside the window, the garden was just beginning to glow, dew clinging to the rose petals like tiny truths refusing to evaporate. "I'm honored," Linda said at last. "Thank you." Susan's voice softened. "It's overdue." The call ended with logistics, event dates, travel arrangements, a public relations brief, but Linda heard what wasn't said just as clearly. Evan had no idea this was happening, and that meant everything. By mid-afternoon, news was moving quietly through the upper floors of the Evan and Partners Foundation. The ethics committee had received the legal notice, the donor review panel had updated its records, and now, whispers gathered momentum like dust spiraling before a collapse. Evan stood outside the conference room, phone to his ear, jaw clenched. "What do—" "You mean I'm being pulled from the panel?" he snapped, a long pause. He stared at the floor as if trying to burn through it. "But it's my company," he said. "My name's on the damn banner." Another pause. His knuckles whitened, then the line went dead. From the other side of the glass wall, Susan stood, arms crossed, watching him. She didn't wave him in. She didn't need to. In her office upstairs, Linda sat across from the Foundation's communications team. On the table in front of her lay a draft press kit for the Women in Wealth seminar. Headshots, speaker bios, panel tracks. Her name was at the top, bold, centered. Keynote speaker, Linda Hallberg, founder, investor, architect of quiet capital. One of the comms leads leaned forward holding a stylus. "Would you prefer we include your connection to Evan and Partners or keep it focused on your broader financial background?" Linda smiled slightly. "Include it, but make sure the timeline is correct. I came before the ampersand." They all chuckled, but Linda's gaze remained fixed on the screen, not out of pride, out of precision. Later that evening, Vanessa sent a single-line text. "He was removed from the panel. They said, pending ethics clarification." Linda stared at the message, unmoved. She thought back to the dinner table, to being skipped during introductions, to the empty space beside the donor plaque. He said she was lucky to be supported, but now, the world was seeing what Susan had known from the start. Linda wasn't lucky. She was foundational. She opened her email. Subject: Keynote confirmation. Speaker deck approval needed attachment. Hallberg Legacy Slides.pdf. Linda clicked download, and as the file opened, the first slide appeared. Not a charity case, the business of being counted. She smiled, and for the first time in a long while, it wasn't quiet. "They counted me out. I was counting interest." The wire hit Linda's account at exactly 9:03 a.m., a Monday. No fanfare, no formal call, just a discreet notification on her phone. $312,468, incoming transfer memo, settlement, Hallberg agreement payout. She stared at the numbers for a long moment, the morning sun spilling golden light across the kitchen floor as the kettle began to hiss. She didn't smile. Not right away. Instead, she pressed her palm to the screen as if grounding herself, proof that what she had waited for, quietly and precisely, had arrived. Her phone buzzed again, this time from Charles, her accountant. "Confirmed, settlement cleared. You now hold full interest proceeds and waived equity. Legal file closed. Congratulations." She made her tea slowly, jasmine, light, fragrant. The scent filled the room like a reward whispered in steam. She carried her mug to the sunroom, sat in the same wicker chair she'd nursed doubt in months earlier, but now she had something solid, final. The investment they thought she forgot had come home, fully matured. Across the room, her laptop chimed. An automated alert popped up from a nonprofit finance portal she hadn't logged into in months. Reminder: application window for Seed Her initiative closes Friday. Linda clicked the link. The page loaded with profiles, young women with fierce eyes and bulletproof pitches, startups in clean energy, maternal health care, microfinance platforms in underserved markets, and below the banner, the initiative's mission: to fund what others overlook. Linda didn't hesitate. Within an hour, she initiated a new fund, the Hallberg Spark Grant. Seed capital exclusively for early-stage women-led ventures. Application-based, no strings, no apologies. She donated half the settlement, exactly $156,234, to start it. Under donor recognition name, she typed simply, Linda Hallberg. No partners, no ampersands. The form asked for a tagline or quote. She entered, "Some legacies don't need permission." By mid-afternoon, the foundation's PR team had emailed her a preview of the announcement, a dignified, full-color banner showcasing her initiative's launch alongside other philanthropic highlights. Linda scanned the page. In the photo grid, Evan's face was nowhere in sight. It was the first time she'd been featured as a benefactor without being adjacent to someone else's reputation. She closed the email, then stood to water the ficus by the window. The leaves were greener than she remembered. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't business. It was Vanessa. Just one text. "I saw the donation. I wish things were different." Linda read it twice. No punctuation, no follow-up, just a soft regret folded into a glowing screen. She sat back down, the weight of the message pressing into her chest like something half familiar, grief dressed as grace. She didn't reply right away, didn't need to. Some wounds asked for silence, not stitches. Instead, she turned her attention to a yellow legal pad beside her, the same one she'd used to calculate the first interest payout. This time, she flipped to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote in bold, "What comes next?" And underneath it, without hesitation, 1. Fund 5 women-led ventures by spring. 2. Launch podcast, The Quiet Founder. 3. Take the name back, fully, publicly. As she capped her pen, her inbox pinged again, this time with a subject line that made her eyes narrow. Subject, Speaking Inquiry, Forbes Women's Summit, Opening Panel. And just below it, the first line of the email, "We'd like to feature you as an example of strategic legacy reclamation." Linda leaned back in her chair. This wasn't revenge. It was return on investment. He said he built something from nothing. I reminded him where nothing came from. The banner stretched across the ballroom arch like a declaration carved in silk. The Hallberg Foundation, funding firsts, not favorites. The letters were bold, centered, black against cream, no ampersands, no partners, just hers. Guests moved like quiet currents through the space, investors, mentees, grant recipients, and women who hadn't been invited to the last gala because someone thought they didn't belong yet. Now, they were the centerpieces. Linda stood at the edge of the room for a moment, letting herself take it in. The scent of white orchids and vanilla candles drifted softly through the air. Her heels clicked gently as she crossed the polished wood floor toward the mic stand. She wasn't nervous. She was ready. Her speech wasn't long. She didn't tell the full story, just enough for those who knew how to read between the lines. Some of you have been told you owe your seat to kindness. Some have been told you're a risk, or a write-off. I was called a charity case once. A small pause. A glance across the room. Soft laughter. But here we are, and I'm not the line item anymore. Applause rose like a tide. Steady, sincere, full of something that wasn't just support. It was recognition, not approval. Acknowledgement. She stepped down from the stage, greeted with handshakes and hugs. Photographers captured each moment. Somewhere near the back, Vanessa stood holding a flute of champagne, her eyes glassy but proud. She hadn't spoken much since the text. But she came. That mattered. The room buzzed with warmth, old friends and new allies. Her first grant recipient, a young woman named Ayanna, stood by the donor wall now bearing Linda's name in gold foil. A startup founder from Detroit, 25 years old, first in her family to register a patent. "Can I ask you something?" Ayanna said later, as the event wound down. "About legacy?" Linda turned to her. "Of course." Ayanna's eyes were clear but earnest. "How do you make sure your legacy stays yours?" Linda smiled and took a sip of tea. No champagne for her tonight. She wanted to remember every detail. "Start with your own pen," she said, voice soft but resonant. "And never give it away." Ayanna nodded slowly, as if writing it down inside herself. Linda turned back toward the center of the room. The lights had dimmed slightly, casting the banner above into a soft glow. Guests had begun to disperse, goodbyes, hugs, photos, and laughter trailing toward the doors, but the room still pulsed with something alive, something permanent. She wandered past the display table near the exit, where glass plaques and framed quotes stood for donors and mentors. She paused in front of one. It was a photo from a recent article, her standing in front of the foundation's logo, arms crossed, a quiet smirk on her lips. Beneath it, a quote pulled from her keynote, "They counted me out. I was counting interest." Then, from behind her, a familiar voice, "You did all this without me." She turned. Evan stood near the doorway, dressed in a dark suit, hands in his pockets. No entourage, no cameras, just him, smaller than before, somehow. "You told everyone you built something from nothing," Linda said, not unkindly. "I reminded them where nothing came from." He stepped closer. "You really never let it go?" "No," she said. "I let you go. That's different." He glanced at the donor wall, at her name alone. "It's clean," he said quietly. Linda nodded once. "Clean doesn't mean empty. It means earned." He didn't argue, just gave a small nod, turned, and left. No scene, no apology. And she didn't need one. She walked back to the center of the ballroom, where the last few guests stood beneath the banner. Someone pointed to it. "You ever imagine this would be your name in lights?" Linda smiled, the kind of smile that came not from a rival, but from reclamation. "He called me a charity case. I became the signature."